YouTube. Today I'll be reading Prisoner B-3087, Chapter 21. Death March, 1945. And Chapter 21 begins on page 166. Chapter 21. One morning after roll call at Auschwitz, we were told we were being moved, all of us. I had never counted, but there had to be 5,000 of us at roll call every day, give or take a few hundred. Workers were needed in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. The officer of the watch told us, and we were being sent to fill their barracks. I could feel the other prisoners tensing around me. If we could have whispered and talked, we would have every day. Allied planes flew overhead, and the bombs they dropped got closer. Sometimes at night we would even hear the sound of guns. Big guns, tank guns, anti-aircraft guns. At the beginning of the war, the Germans had taken the fight to France, to Belgium, to Holland, to Russia. Now the fight was happening in Germany. So when the Nazis said they were moving us to Sachsenhausen because the camp needed workers, none of us believed them. The Allies were getting closer. They were pushing back. Any day now we might be liberated. That was the talk in the barracks. The Nazis were probably moving us away from the front lines. There were no trains to take us to Sachsenhausen. The watch officer told us so we would walk. That was another good sign for the end of the war. If the Germans had to use all their trains for the war effort, but it was bad for us. I had no idea where Sachsenhausen was, or how far we would have to go. But just the thought of walking all day made me feel exhausted. There were others I knew who would never make it a kilometer. But walk we would, some in bare feet, some in odd-sized wooden clogs in our thin uniforms. In the middle of winter, the Nazis gave us each a half a loaf of bread, and told us it was to last us the whole trip. But how many days would that be? None of us dared ask. I decided right away that I would eat just a bit of my bread at a time, to make it last. If I ended up with extra, I would eat the rest at Sachsenhausen. Under the whips and clubs of capos and SS officers, we marched out through the front of Auschwitz. You come in through the front gate, but the only way you leave is through the chimney, the guards had told us when we arrived. Ha! Look at me now, I wanted to shout, walking out through the front gate the way I came in. I had survived the ghetto, I had survived Plazo, and Wyszka, and Treblinka, and Birkenau, and now Auschwitz. I was going to survive it all. I was going to be alive when the Allies liberated us. This I swore. But nothing had prepared me for the death march. This is what we began to call it as our numbers dwindled. We marched for hours upon hours each day, stumbling and staggering along as best we could. We walked and walked, and we walked and we walked, and I began to think there was no Sachsenhausen, that the Nazis merely meant to walk us to death. Those who could not keep up were shot and left by the roadside. The crack of guns behind us was our constant companion, and you knew you had slowed too much if the guns got too loud. Snow fell on us most days, and the dirt we walked on was frozen. When we were lucky, freezing slush when we were not. Those without shoes were the first to fall behind and die. Some tore strips from their canvas jackets and wrapped them around their bare feet. But once the canvas got wet, it was worse. At least I had wooden clogs to keep my feet off the frozen earth. But without socks, my feet were blocks of ice anyway. There was no water. We ate snow when we stopped for the night, caught flakes on our tongues as we walked. We slept in the open when there was no barn or shed to be found, which was most nights, sleeping on top of one another like dogs for the warmth. The capos and Nazis had fires to keep them warm. At least in the camps we had shelter to keep the weather off us at night. Out here the elements killed more prisoners than our guards did. On the 5th day, or was it the 6th, I had lost count. I woke up and I was sure I couldn't go on any farther. My arms and legs were so cold I couldn't make them move in the morning. I was sure a Nazi would shoot me. But there were others like me, many others. One man's ear had frozen to the ground in the night. The Nazi gave us time to wake and stir before resuming the march. which was a small mercy. Perhaps they just didn't have bullets for us all. As we shambled along later that day, I looked at the men around me. We were skeletons, ghosts, filthy, toothless creatures in oversized, soiled prisoner uniforms. The hair on our heads was growing thin and scraggly from not too recent shavings. Our fingers were long and bony like vampires from some Hollywood horror movie. The skin on our faces cracked and drawn back like mummies. The older men had the beginnings of beards on their gray skin. And we all walked like zombies, stumbling more than striding, trying always to stay just one step ahead of the Nazis and their guns. Not long ago, all these half-dead creatures around me had been people. I realized which of them had been doctors, teachers, musicians, businessmen like my father. Which of the boys had been students like me, playing ball in the streets after school, laughing and calling to their friends. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Years. How many years? Like the days, I was beginning to lose count. 5 years. 6. Had it been that long? I had been 10 when the war started. That made me 16 years old now. I should almost be done with school and thinking about a career, or maybe even university. Mother and father had always wanted me to go to university, but there had been plenty of time to think about that once. Years and years to prepare. Years that were gone now, stolen from me by the Nazis. I closed my eyes, half walking and half sleeping, listening always for the crack of the guns at my heels, to know when to pick up my pace. There was the danger of passing out, of being shot while I slept, but I couldn't help it. I had only half my bread left, tucked into the waist of my pants. I had stretched it as far as it would go, and still I had no energy left to walk. Something droned in the distance, and our shambling column, so much smaller now than when we had begun our journey, slowed to look up. 3 enormous planes flew by, high in the clouds, raining tiny black specks from their bellies. Bombs. They were Allied planes dropping bombs somewhere in the distance. We heard the rumble of explosions and saw smoke rise over a hill on the horizon. I wanted to cheer them on, to raise my fist, and cry, "Yes, yes, stick it to the Nazis." But I knew I had to keep silent. I wasn't sure I had the strength to shout anyway. The capos cracked their whips, and we got moving again. But secretly, I was still urging the Allies on to victory. One of the prisoners began to sing. He was Czech, I think. It sounded like Czech, from what I'd heard of it in the camps. "Bishovo dobre, Bijavlo dobre," he sang, his voice weak but insistent. "Zanech malech let Bijivl slet jako kvet," I sensed. Sure, one of the soldiers would shoot him, but they let him continue. Another prisoner, another Czech farther along the line, joined him, and then another behind me. Then a Pole beside me began to sing, and I recognized the refrain. "Hey, hey, hey, falcons, past the mountains, forest pits, ring, 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 my little bell, in the steppe, ring, 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 sorry, sorry, for the girl, for the green Ukraine, sorry, sorry, your heart is weeping, I'll never see you again." Another Pole took up, "Hey, falcons," with him, and there was a chorus. Then the German Jews began to sing a different song, and the Italian Jews another. I heard a Dutch voice and an English one, and behind me came the most beautiful French voice I had ever heard, though. I didn't understand a word of his song. We sang as we walked, all of us, singing 100 different songs, and the Nazis let us sing, "Another Small Mercy," or perhaps they too missed the way the world had been before the war. If you want to hear chapter 22, look for my next video.